The boardroom buzzed with chatter as Ethel, the cleaning lady, moved about her work with quiet grace. She pushed her cart, each step seeming methodical, slow, and deliberate. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was racing. She observed every word, memorized every expression, because she wasn't just any janitor. She was the owner. Ethel had taken on this role, unnoticed, to understand the inner workings of her newly acquired company. She wanted to see how it operated when people thought no one important was watching. Ethel was no stranger to hard work or being underestimated. Born into poverty, she knew what it was like to be disregarded and looked down upon. From humble beginnings, she had worked tirelessly to build her business, overcoming countless obstacles and proving her worth in spaces where people saw only her gender, her race, or her modest origins. When she acquired this once thriving company, now on the brink of collapse, she chose to enter quietly, as a janitor, to see for herself what had gone wrong. 2 weeks into her undercover role, Ethel had seen the ugliness that thrived in the shadows. Arrogance, casual racism, and a complete disregard for those considered lower were all too common. Today, she stood quietly cleaning, unnoticed as the executives debated whose department would face the next round of layoffs. Her heart tightened as Mark, a mid-level manager with a sharp tongue and an inflated ego, sneered, "Why do we need all these janitors anyway? They're barely necessary. We could cut half of them and save a ton." Ethel's eyes narrowed, her hands tightening around her mop handle. She had encountered too many people like Mark Hastings in her life, those who dehumanized others without a second thought. People who saw workers not as individuals, but as expendable numbers on a spreadsheet. She felt the sting of his words, but kept her face neutral, her expression calm. Today was not the day to reveal her true identity. Today was for watching, listening, and understanding the depth of the problems she needed to solve. Justice, she knew, would come, but on her terms and in her time. She moved to the corner of the room, wiping down a table as the executives continued to argue over budget cuts and layoffs. Their conversation dripped with self-importance, their focus entirely on profit margins and shareholder value, with no regard for the people whose lives they were discussing. To them, janitors were invisible, just another cost to be minimized. Ethel knew differently. She had been at the bottom, and she understood the value of every person who contributed to a company's success. The janitors, the clerks, the assistants, they were the backbone of the business. Without them, nothing worked. She intended to show everyone in this room just how valuable those people were. But first, she needed to see who could be trusted, who was worth keeping, and who had to go. As the meeting wound down, Mark made another dismissive comment, this time about the cleaning crew's lack of real skills. Laughter followed, and Ethel forced herself to stay composed. She had endured worse in her life. Today was not about reacting. It was about gathering information, about understanding the rot at the core of her company. With the meeting over, the executives filed out, barely noticing her as they passed. Ethel quietly resumed her duties, her mind already planning the next steps. She wasn't just cleaning up spilled coffee or dusting tables. She was preparing to clean house. The time for change was coming, and when it did, those who underestimated her would learn that the silent janitor had more power than they could ever imagine. Later that evening, Ethel sat alone in the break room, sipping her coffee. Laughter and chatter echoed around her as other employees gossiped freely, oblivious to her presence. "Did you see that new cleaning lady? Bet she doesn't even speak English," one of the assistants joked, drawing a chorus of laughter. Ethel stared into her coffee, her face an unreadable mask. She knew she needed to stay silent. For now, this company wasn't just failing. It was broken at its very core, and Ethel was determined to fix it. She wasn't interested in superficial solutions like firing good people or making reckless cuts to trim costs. No, she was here to uproot the real problem. The culture of arrogance that permeated every level of management, a culture that made life miserable for so many. She would rebuild this place with empathy, not arrogance. The next morning, Ethel slipped into her janitor's uniform once more, blending seamlessly into the background as she began her day. She overheard Mark Hastings, the same mid-level manager whose arrogance grated at her patience, speaking in a raised voice. He was talking about the cleaning crew again, calling them unnecessary and mocking their work. His derisive laughter, and that of the others around him, was like nails on a chalkboard to Ethel. Enough was enough. By the afternoon, Ethel felt a determination she couldn't hold back any longer. She set down her mop, her heart pounding as she walked toward the boardroom. She could hear the executives inside, already engaged in yet another discussion about who to lay off next, who was expendable, whose department was a burden on their precious bottom line. She paused for a moment outside the door, gathering her thoughts. Without hesitation, she opened the door and stepped inside. The executives looked up, surprised by the interruption. The CEO, Richard, was seated at the head of the table, his brows knitting together in confusion as Ethel approached. He stared at her, clearly wondering what a janitor could possibly be doing in their meeting. Ethel walked to his side without a word and handed him a sealed envelope. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. The entire room fell silent, the kind of silence that thickened the air and made each passing second feel weighty. Richard looked at her, then at the envelope in his hands. Slowly, he tore it open, unfolding the papers inside. His eyes moved quickly over the documents, and with each line, his confusion shifted into disbelief, his face paling. The room seemed to shrink around them, the other executives watching as the CEO's expression turned from bewilderment to shock. He looked up at Ethel, unable to hide the astonishment in his eyes. "I'm the new owner," Ethel said, her voice ringing clear and strong across the boardroom. "And things are about to change." A stunned silence followed, the kind of silence that comes when the world suddenly turns upside down. Mark Hastings stood, his face flushed with a mix of disbelief and indignation. "You're just a janitor. You can't do this." Ethel turned her gaze to Mark, her eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in her expression, just a cold, hard certainty that made Mark flinch. "I'm not just anything," she replied. "I'm the owner of this company. I control your job, your salary, and the direction of this business. And I won't allow people who mistreat others to remain in power here." Mark tried to sputter a response, but his words failed him. Ethel raised her hand, cutting him off. "You're fired," she said, her voice steady. "Effective immediately." A murmur swept through the room as Mark's face turned crimson. He looked around, his eyes seeking support from his colleagues, but he found none. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone could feel it. At that moment, the boardroom door opened, and two security guards stepped inside, awaiting Ethel's instructions. "Escort Mr. Hastings out of the building," Ethel directed, her tone leaving no room for argument. The guards moved forward, and Mark, his confidence shattered, had no choice but to comply. He muttered under his breath as they led him away, but his protests were weak, his bravado utterly deflated. As the door closed behind them, Ethel turned back to the remaining executives. Their eyes were wide, their faces a mix of fear, confusion, and curiosity. "This company has been on the brink of collapse," she began, her voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that demanded attention. "And it's because of the choices made in this room. I bought this company to save it, but I won't tolerate the toxic culture that brought us to the edge." She walked slowly around the room, her gaze meeting each executive's eyes. "This business isn't just about numbers and profits. It's about people. And starting today, we're going to do things differently. We will treat our employees with respect. We will value every person who contributes to our success, from the janitors to the executives." The room remained silent, her words hanging in the air, challenging each person to reflect on their actions. Some of the executives looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Others nodded slowly, as if beginning to understand. Ethel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "There will be more changes coming," she continued. "I expect each of you to consider whether you are willing to be part of this new direction. Those who are not, you know where the door is." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "This company is not failing because of the janitors, or the clerks, or the assistants. It's failing because we forgot what truly matters, the people. And that changes now." With that, Ethel turned and left the boardroom, her heart still pounding but her resolve unwavering. She had taken the first step, and there would be many more to come. The silence behind her spoke volumes. Shock, disbelief, and perhaps, for some, a glimmer of hope. Ethel knew that this was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, but she was ready. She had spent her life fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. Now, she would fight for others to have the same. And she wouldn't stop until this company was a place where everyone, from the top executive to the quietest janitor, was treated with the dignity they deserved. The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief evident on everyone's faces. Mark Hastings stood, his face flushed. "You're just a janitor. You can't do this." Ethel turned to face him, her gaze unyielding. "I'm not just a janitor. I'm the woman who now controls your job, your salary, and the direction of this company. And people like you, people who think they can mistreat others without consequence, are the ones who need to go." The boardroom was silent again, a tension hanging in the air. Mark tried to argue, but Ethel raised her hand, silencing him. "You're fired," she said simply. Mark's face turned pale as two security guards entered the room. "Escort Mr. Hastings out," Ethel instructed. The guards moved forward, and Mark, for once, had nothing to say. His confidence crumbled, his bravado replaced by an expression of pure disbelief. The guards took him by the arms, and he was led out, his protests nothing more than incoherent mumbling. With Mark gone, Ethel turned back to the remaining executives, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. "This company has been on the brink of collapse because of the choices made in this room," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I bought this company to save it, but I won't allow toxic leadership to continue." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, her gaze sweeping across the room. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared back at her with a mix of fear and curiosity. Ethel knew this was the moment that mattered most, the moment where she either gained their respect or lost it, and she had no intention of losing. Ethel continued, "This business isn't about squeezing profits at the expense of our people. It's about the people who make this company what it is. We've forgotten that, and it's time to remember. The culture in this company has been rotten for far too long, and starting today, we are going to change that." She walked slowly around the table, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. "I'm not here to fire people who are doing their jobs with dedication and integrity. I'm here to remove those who think they are above others, who treat their co-workers with disrespect, who contribute to a toxic environment. We need leaders who inspire, not intimidate. We need people who lift others up, not tear them down." Ethel's gaze fell on Richard, the CEO, who sat stiffly at the head of the table. "Richard, you have a choice to make. You can either be part of this transformation, or you can step aside. But know this, there will be no room for arrogance or mistreatment of others moving forward." Richard swallowed hard, nodding slightly. Ethel could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but also a glimmer of understanding. Perhaps he hadn't realized the extent of the damage until now. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was willing to change. Ethel turned her attention back to the entire room. "We will invest in our employees. We will treat every individual with the respect they deserve. This company's strength comes from its people, all of its people, not just those sitting in this room. From the janitors to the executives, everyone plays a crucial role, and everyone deserves to be valued." She stopped at the end of the table, taking a deep breath. "The changes won't be easy, and they won't happen overnight, but they are necessary. I want each of you to think carefully about whether you can be part of this new direction. If not, you are free to leave, no questions asked. But if you choose to stay, you must commit fully to making this company a place of respect and growth for everyone." The silence was deafening, the weight of her words pressing down on each of the executives. Some looked away, others nodded slowly. The fear in the room was palpable, but so was something else, hope. A hope that perhaps things could change, that the company could be saved, that they could be proud of where they worked once more. Ethel turned to leave, her heart pounding but her resolve stronger than ever. She had taken a stand, and she knew it was just the beginning. There would be resistance, there would be challenges, but she was ready for them. She had fought her way to where she was, and she wasn't about to back down now. As she reached the door, She turned back one last time. "Remember," she said, her voice softer now but no less firm, "we're all in this together. Let's build something we can be proud of." With that, she walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a room full of executives who were now faced with a choice: adapt and grow, or be left behind. The future of the company depended on it, and Ethel was determined to make sure that future was one of dignity, respect, and true leadership. A week later, the office had a different energy. Gone were the sneering comments, the laughter at others' expense. In their place was an atmosphere of hope and cautious optimism. Ethel had dismissed several more executives who refused to align with her vision of respect and equality. She had promoted those who understood her values, those who had worked tirelessly, often without recognition, including the janitors who had always carried out their duties quietly and diligently. The employees who had once mocked her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing Ethel not as a mere janitor, but as the true leader she was. She moved through the office with purpose, taking time to speak with her workers, asking about their needs and concerns. She listened intently, her compassion shining through in every interaction. Ethel knew that true leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about empowering others, and she intended to prove that every single day. In the days that followed, Ethel implemented changes that aimed to improve not just the company's productivity, but also the quality of life for every employee. She revised the benefits packages to include better healthcare, parental leave, and mental health support. She established open-door policies that encouraged employees to share their thoughts and ideas without fear of retribution. Slowly but surely, the culture of the office began to transform. One afternoon, Ethel met with Richard, the former CEO, who now worked under her direction in a reduced capacity. He sat across from her, his demeanor no longer one of arrogance, but of someone who had been humbled. Ethel laid out her plans for the future, plans that included reinvesting in the workforce, fostering innovation, and creating an environment where everyone felt valued. Richard nodded solemnly as she spoke, a look of realization dawning on his face. He finally understood what true leadership looked like. It wasn't about power or status. It was about service, about lifting others up rather than pushing them down. Ethel's approach was unlike anything he had ever seen, and though it was difficult for him to admit, he knew she was right. Ethel continued to walk the office floor each day, her presence a reminder of the changes taking place. She would stop and chat with the janitors, the clerks, the assistants, those who had often been overlooked by previous leadership. She knew their names, their stories, and their struggles. And in return, they trusted her, they respected her, and they began to take pride in their work once more. She knew that the transformation would not happen overnight. There would be setbacks and moments of doubt. But as she looked around at the faces of her employees, no longer filled with fear but with hope, she knew she was on the right path. The office felt lighter, more vibrant. People smiled more, laughed together, and worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Ethel had once been dismissed as unnecessary, just a faceless worker. But now, she was the heart of the company, a leader who saw the potential in everyone and believed that no one was beneath respect. Her journey from janitor to owner was more than a personal triumph. It was a symbol of what was possible when people were given the chance to rise, to be heard, and to be treated with dignity. She knew her work was far from over. There were still challenges to face, still hurdles to overcome. But Ethel had faith in herself, in her employees, and in the future they were building together. As she stood in the center of the bustling office, watching her workers collaborate and thrive, she allowed herself a small smile. This was the beginning of something beautiful, a company rebuilt from the ground up, not with arrogance and fear, but with empathy, respect, and a shared vision of success. As Ethel walked the halls that evening, she allowed herself a small smile. She had taken on the role of janitor not just to understand the company, but to show others what real strength looked like. The company was now on a new path, one that valued each employee's worth, from the executives to the janitorial staff. Ethel had always believed that no one was truly unnecessary, and now, she had the chance to create a company that lived by that truth. Each person had something unique to offer, and she was determined to make sure they felt that value every day. It was a journey of rebuilding, not just the business, but the sense of dignity that every individual deserved. As she reached her office, a young woman, a newly hired janitor, approached nervously. "Is it okay if I ask for advice?" she asked. Ethel smiled warmly, her eyes filled with kindness. "Of course," she said, her voice gentle yet strong. "No one gets left behind here. We're all in this together." And with those words, Ethel knew that the future was bright. The changes were taking root, and the seeds of respect and empathy were beginning to grow. It was just the beginning, but already, she could see the difference. A culture of care and integrity had been planted, and Ethel was ready to nurture it, one person at a time, ensuring that no one, no matter their title, was ever overlooked again. Thank you all for watching and listening to this inspiring story of resilience, justice, and the power of true leadership. Ethel's journey reminds us that everyone deserves respect, no matter their position. We'd love to hear your stories too. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt underestimated? What would you have done in Ethel's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with friends who could use a reminder that justice is always possible. Stay tuned for more powerful stories, and until next time, stay strong and be kind.